I realized that the disappointment and the hardships were going to happen to lead to the better, more exciting stuff.
I realized that the disappointment and the hardships were going to happen to lead to the better and more exciting stuff. Melissa Gilbert begged Michael Landon to change the scripts of Little House on the Prairie, but America wanted romance, and she was forced to deliver. At 15, she'd never been kissed. At 23, Dean Butler knew it was wrong, yet they filmed scene after scene while 100 crew members watched. Her mother stood crying in the shadows, viewers wrote angry letters. Now both stars are finally admitting what everyone suspected but no one would say. The truth about their on-screen relationship is darker than anyone imagined. Melissa Gilbert's life began with heartbreak before she even had a name. She was born on May 8, 1964 in Los Angeles. Her biological parents, Kathy Wood and David Darlington, were newly engaged and already had 3 kids each from past marriages. Just one day after her birth, they gave her up for adoption. They said they couldn't afford to raise a 7th child. Melissa never spent a single full night with them. She was adopted immediately by actor and comedian Paul Gilbert and his wife Barbara Crane, a dancer and actress. That instant separation stayed with her forever. Years later, in her book Prairie Tale, she confessed, "A large part of my life has been an illusion. Paul Gilbert wasn't just a father, he was her world. But that world fell apart on February 13, 1976. Melissa was only 11 when she was told that her dad had died of a stroke. It made sense, he had suffered one before, but the truth was far more painful. Paul Gilbert had died by suicide. For decades no one told her he had been a World War II fighter pilot who lived with constant unbearable pain from injuries he'd sustained. The Veterans Administration was caring for him, but even they couldn't help him cope. By the time Melissa found out the truth at age 44, it shattered her. She told Oprah she was barely functioning for weeks. She ended up hiring a private investigator to learn what really happened. She needed answers. She needed to understand why the one person who saved her from being unwanted was suddenly gone, and no one had told her the truth. Even though she was adopted, Melissa had show business in her blood. Her adoptive mother, Barbara Crane, was the daughter of Harry Crane, the man who created The Honeymooners and helped reinvent the Dean Martin show with the idea of celebrity roasts. Harry had written for the Oscars, the Emmys, and even the Golden Globes. He was a giant in early television, and that legacy shaped the world Melissa would grow up in. Barbara, too, had her own career in entertainment. That meant Melissa was raised in a family where TV sets, scripts, and red carpets weren't out of reach. They were part of her daily life. That showbiz energy flowed through the whole family. In 1967, Paul and Barbara adopted another child, Jonathan Gilbert. A few years later, in 1975, Barbara had a daughter named Sarah with her new husband, attorney Harold Abeles. All 3 kids, Melissa, Jonathan, and Sarah, ended up becoming TV stars. Melissa didn't just fall into fame, she earned it. Before she turned 5, she was already doing commercials. One of the most famous came in 1977 when she starred in an Alpo dog food ad with Lauren Chapin. Gilbert had natural chemistry, and the ad featured her gushing about her dog Fluffy winning a blue ribbon. At just 9 years old, Melissa Gilbert stepped into a casting room filled with more than 500 hopeful girls, and left with a role that would define her for life. It was early 1973 and NBC was searching nationwide for the perfect child to play Laura Ingalls in a new pilot. When Melissa walked in and began her screen test with Michael Landon, something happened. He didn't just see a young actress, he saw his on-screen daughter. He later said, "There was a magic in her performance. She wasn't acting, she was Laura." And right there at the Burbank Studios, her life changed forever. The funny part? Melissa had no idea who Landon was. She'd never watched Bonanza, a show that had made him a star for 14 straight years. So when she auditioned, she didn't act nervous or try to impress him with compliments. She just played the scene. That honesty, that lack of polish, was exactly what Landon had been hoping to find. She didn't see him as a celebrity. She saw him as Pa, and that bond, that effortless connection, would become the heart of Little House on the Prairie for the next 9 years. Even the way Melissa found out she got the role felt like something out of a TV drama. One day at school, a classmate named Leslie Landon came up to her with a huge smile. Leslie, Michael Landon's real daughter, said, "My dad picked you." No phone call, no studio announcement, just two girls in a school hallway. Years later, those same two girls would be back on set, Leslie playing schoolteacher Miss Beadle in the final seasons of the show. Melissa filmed the pilot in the summer of 1973 in the scenic hills of California. It aired the following March and pulled in over 17 million viewers. That was huge. But even after that success, she had to wait nearly a year to find out if the show would become a full series. For a kid, that kind of waiting feels like forever. But by June 1974, filming began again and Little House on the Prairie was officially born. It would run until 1983, 9 full seasons of family hardship and frontier life. One moment sealed her fate. During her final audition, she had to act out a scene where Laura says goodbye to her dog. It was tough, real tears, real pain. Landon was watching closely, and by the end he had tears in his eyes. She moved him, and not many adult actors could do that, let alone a child. It wasn't training, it wasn't technique, it was raw emotional honesty. That day he knew she wasn't just playing Laura Ingalls, she was her. From ages 10 to 19, Melissa wasn't just playing a character, she was growing up in front of an entire country. At its peak, the show drew more than 20 million viewers per episode every week. She was in America's living room. Millions watched her lose baby teeth, grow taller, go through puberty, all on camera. No child in history had ever been watched this closely for that long. It was more than just a show, it was a national event unfolding one episode at a time. While most kids were riding bikes or doing homework, Melissa was memorizing lines and getting camera ready at dawn. But school didn't stop. Instead of attending a traditional classroom, she learned right there on set. Tutors would jump in between takes, giving quick, focused lessons to meet state education laws. It wasn't easy, but it worked. She and the other child actors formed a tight-knit group, kids who lived in two worlds. Once student and star, even with a heavy schedule, Melissa found time to take on roles that proved she wasn't just a one-show wonder. In 1979, she starred in The Miracle Worker at just 15, playing Helen Keller. It was intense and emotional, and it earned her an Emmy nomination. A year later, she played in Frank in another dramatic role, again, another nomination. These weren't just cute kid roles, these were some of the hardest young characters in television, and she nailed them all while still filming Little House. But the wildest part of Melissa's story isn't the fame or the awards. It's how deeply she became Laura Ingalls. The character didn't just stay on the screen. Laura's values, struggles, and strength became part of who Melissa was. She said that Little House wasn't just a job, it was her childhood, her family, her entire world. By the time the show ended, there was no clear line between who she was and who she played. The character helped raise her. When Dean Butler was cast as Almanzo Wilder in Season 6 of Little House on the Prairie, he was 23 years old. Melissa Gilbert, who played Laura Ingalls, was just 15. That 8-year difference might not sound like much now, but back in 1979 it felt like a canyon. Dean even called it the Grand Canyon of age gaps. For a show that aired during Family Hour and prided itself on wholesome storytelling, this pairing raised eyebrows, not just among viewers but within the cast itself. Melissa was still in high school, Dean was out of college, and yet they were expected to play sweethearts, romantic scenes, emotional closeness, a first kiss, all on screen, all for millions to watch. That decision made by the producers created tension and discomfort that never really went away. Melissa didn't hide how she felt. When she first heard Dean was cast, her emotions exploded. She called it a perfect storm of disappointment, fear, anger, and nausea. She had imagined acting opposite someone close to her age, someone who understood what it meant to be a teenager. Instead, they brought in a man with stubble, a man she'd be expected to kiss. But that wasn't just acting, it became real. In the episode titled Sweet 16, Laura gets her first kiss, and so did Melissa. It wasn't just her first kiss on camera, it was her first kiss ever. No dates, no experience, nothing to prepare her for it, just a film crew, bright lights, and nearly 100 people staring as the cameras rolled. Dean Butler knew it was awkward. He later admitted he was nervous. Really nervous. She was. Just a little girl, he said. It was hard. He knew that in today's Hollywood, this kind of casting would never fly. It would be rejected instantly. But back then it happened, and it became one of the most talked about moments in the show's history. What made it even harder was what happened off camera. Melissa's mother, Barbara Beals, stood behind the cameras watching as her daughter leaned in for that kiss. Barbara broke down crying. This wasn't a proud moment, it was a painful one. Her little girl was growing up not in private but in front of the world, on a set with a grown man, for ratings. Dean remembered it clearly. He later wrote in his memoir Prairie Man that Barbara never liked the idea of me being cast, and when the kiss happened, her disapproval turned to heartbreak. She couldn't bear seeing me kiss her daughter. Melissa, meanwhile, was trying everything to avoid it. She begged Michael Landon, the show's creator. "Can it just be a hug?" she'd ask, desperate to stay within her comfort zone. But the scripts kept coming, kiss after kiss, scene after scene, and every time she had to play the part, even when she felt sick, even when she had never felt love in real life, even when she was terrified. And viewers noticed. Some loved the romance, others were horrified. One mother wrote to a newspaper demanding that the casting director be burned at the stake for pairing a teenage girl with a grown man. Dean Butler got letters too. Some fans said watching those scenes made them feel uneasy, and they weren't wrong. A 1979 article predicted it would be the most difficult role of the season, not because of the lines, but because of the reality. Dean Butler may have the trickiest role of the 1979-80 TV season. It read. He has to convince viewers that it's okay for a grown man to fall in love with a pubescent girl. Despite the backlash, the episode was a massive hit. Sweet 16 topped the Nielsen ratings and was aired twice in prime time that summer. It became iconic. Years later, TV Land would even give them an award for the most memorable kiss in television history. But what was the cost? A 15-year-old girl forced into adult emotions, a mother left crying in the shadows, an actor who felt deeply uncomfortable, and an industry that at the time put ratings above everything else. Dean later said, "You just couldn't do it today." He's right. Times have changed, standards have changed, and thankfully so has the way Hollywood treats young actors. But for Melissa Gilbert, that change came too late. Her childhood was shaped by a script she didn't write. Melissa Gilbert's life looked picture-perfect on TV, but behind the scenes, everything was falling apart. While millions watched her grow up as Laura Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie, Melissa was quietly slipping into addiction. It started in her teenage years and got worse fast. By the time she was an adult, she was drinking 2 full bottles of wine every night. That wasn't just casual drinking, it was survival. And it nearly killed her. One night, while she had a dinner guest over, she blacked out and passed out in her dog's bed. That was the moment she finally realized she couldn't keep living like this. But alcohol wasn't her only escape, she was also using cocaine. Fame had made her lonely, and the constant pressure of being a child star never let up. The drugs numbed it all for a while, but the damage showed up in every corner of her life. Her relationships suffered, her parenting suffered. Eventually her own son, in a heartbreaking moment, begged her to stop drinking. That plea hit her harder than anything else ever had. It was the wake-up call she couldn't ignore. She joined Alcoholics Anonymous the next day. The 12-step program became her lifeline. Sitting in those meetings, hearing others share their darkest stories, she finally felt less alone. She opened up in her 2009 memoir Prairie Tale, telling the truth about her addictions, failed relationships, and the emotional wreckage left behind by a childhood spent under the spotlight. But the trauma didn't stop there. In the early 1990s, Melissa auditioned for a role in Oliver Stone's film The Doors. What happened next haunted her for years. According to Gilbert, Stone wanted revenge. She had once made negative comments about him publicly, and now during the audition he set her up. He handed her a scene he claimed he had just written for her. It wasn't a real scene, it was a trap. The lines were graphic. She had to get on her hands and knees and repeat the words. "Do me, baby." She felt humiliated as tears filled her eyes. Stone looked at her coldly and said, "Good, that will make it better." The casting director had mysteriously stepped out, leaving her alone with Stone and another actor. She ran out in tears. To this day she believes the whole thing was a calculated punishment. Stone later denied it, but Gilbert never backed down. Then came her marriage to Bo Brinkman. On the surface it was a Hollywood romance, but within 6 weeks of meeting they were engaged and heading straight for disaster. He was emotionally abusive, an alcoholic, and constantly unfaithful. Their 6-year marriage was a slow-motion collapse. Brinkman didn't just cheat, he did it shamelessly. One of the worst betrayals came when he allegedly slept with Shannon Doherty, Melissa's former Little House co-star. Doherty had once looked up to her like a big sister. Now she had become part of her heartbreak. At the time Shannon was barely 19. Brinkman was around 40 years later. When asked what she'd say if she saw Doherty again, Melissa didn't hesitate. "I wouldn't say anything," she said. "I'd just punch her in the nose." But that betrayal was nothing compared to what came next. Just 2 months after Melissa had a C-section and gave birth to their son Dakota, she was woken by his cries. She went downstairs to warm a bottle. What she found in the living room nearly broke her. Her husband was on the couch having sex with another woman. The TV cast a dim light over the scene. For a second she thought it had to be a dream, but it wasn't. When she stood there in shock he looked at her and said, "What are you looking at?" No guilt, no apology, just arrogance. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she walked to the fridge, got the milk, warmed it, and went back upstairs to feed their baby while her husband continued cheating on her right there on their couch. The woman turned out to be a sex worker Brinkman had found through the Robin Bird Show, a late-night sex program. Later, when Melissa confronted him, he blamed her. He said it was her fault for not being sexually available after surgery. That wasn't the end of it. After the woman left, Brinkman came upstairs in a rage. "What's your problem?" he shouted. When she tried to keep things quiet for their newborn, he pushed for a fight. When she told him she couldn't believe he'd brought a hooker into their home, he replied, "Yeah, what's your problem?" He didn't stop there. He called her selfish, blamed her for his stalled career, and punished her emotionally. When she told her mother about her pregnancy before telling him because he was unreachable, he gave her the silent treatment for 3 days. He missed their baby shower entirely because he had gone on a drinking binge. Melissa Gilbert's life didn't just evolve, it took sharp turns, bold leaps, and surprising falls. But through it all her story stayed deeply human. At 48, after 2 failed marriages and decades in the spotlight, she found something unexpected: real love. His name was Timothy Busfield. They had known each other for over 20 years, crossing paths on sets and industry events, but never as more than colleagues. That changed in late 2012. Over the holidays they got engaged. By April 24, 2013 they were married in a quiet romantic ceremony at the Santa Ynez Ranch in Santa Barbara. She wore red, not white, a bold strapless gown by Monique Louillier. At the time Gilbert had 2 sons. Busfield had 3 children of his own. They weren't starting fresh, they were blending lives. But this time, Gilbert felt different. Busfield gave her something she hadn't had before, a true partnership, someone who believed in her, someone who pushed her forward. In 2018 they moved to upstate New York, far from the chaos of Hollywood. "My favorite thing in the world is working together," she said. But before finding peace, Gilbert dove into the storm. In 2000 she was elected to the Screen Actors Guild Board of Directors. Just 1 year later, she stunned everyone by becoming the 3rd woman ever elected president of SAG. The election was brutal. Her opponent was Valerie Harper. Out of 27,630 votes, Gilbert won 12,280 to Harper's 10,692. That's 45.3% to 39.4%. Hollywood insiders were shocked. The union had been divided under previous President William Daniels, whose leadership led to the longest strike in Hollywood history, 6 months against advertisers in 2000. Gilbert promised to fix the chaos, and she did. In March 2002 she won again, this time with 21,351 votes out of 37,742, over 50%. Ballot returns hit a record high of 41.4%. During her presidency from 2001 to 2005, she met with governors, mayors, and senators. She pushed hard for performers' rights. In December 2001 she became vice president of the AFL-CIO. Suddenly the woman who once played Laura Ingalls was one of the most powerful labor leaders in America. Then, just when people thought they had her figured out, she shocked them again. On August 10, 2015, at age 51, Gilbert announced she was running for Congress, not in California, not in New York, but in Michigan's 8th District, a Republican stronghold. She had only moved there 2 years earlier. The backlash was instant. Her opponent's team called her a tax cheat. They revealed she owed $360,000 in federal taxes and $112,000 to the state of California, nearly $500,000 in unpaid taxes. She admitted it, blaming a mix of career stalls, recession fallout, and divorce. She was on a payment plan. The campaign went on until May 24, 2016. That's when she suddenly withdrew, not because of politics but because of pain. In 2012, while competing on Dancing with the Stars, she had suffered a concussion and whiplash from a fall. Later, a balcony collapsed at her Studio City home. The injuries never fully healed. Doctors told her she needed surgery for 2 herniated discs. Her right hand had gone numb. Her arm shot with pain. Her neck throbbed. With no other Democrat on the ballot, her exit handed the win to her Republican opponent. The race was over, but her fight wasn't. Even after stepping away from Congress, Gilbert kept pushing for change. In 2002, she joined a White House event hosted by First Lady Laura Bush promoting literacy across America. Behind the scenes, she also met with White House staff about runaway production and copyright issues, huge problems for American film workers. She chaired key SIGI committees on affirmative action and young performers' rights. She stood for diversity, she stood for child actors, and when politics got heated she took a side. During her 2016 campaign she loudly supported Planned Parenthood. She tweeted with Idris stand with PP. She joined Walk for Choice events. It wasn't just a political stand, she and her brother had both been adopted. Her pro-choice stance wasn't just a slogan, it was personal. In 2014, even before running, she campaigned for Michigan gubernatorial candidate Mark Schauer. Her loyalty to Democratic causes ran deep, but her most lasting public moment came much earlier. When she was just 21 years old in 1985, Melissa Gilbert became the youngest person ever to receive a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It's at 64-29. Hollywood Boulevard, a permanent reminder that this wasn't just a child star. She had already produced the Emmy-winning The Miracle Worker in 1979. She'd done over 30 commercials by age 2, Crest McDonald's Jif toys with Henry Fonda no less, and in 1987, just 2 years after receiving her star, she made her off-Broadway debut in Asha Medal. She won the Outer Critics Circle Award for Best Debuting Actress. Melissa Gilbert was 50 years old in January 2015 when she made a bold decision. She had her breast implants removed. It wasn't just a health choice, it was a personal rebellion. For years Hollywood had told her how she should look. The implants came after a divorce. When she started dating again, the surgery had gone well, and everything seemed fine at first, but over time she grew uncomfortable. She said it plainly, she didn't like how they looked or felt. She even joked about how taking a Zumba class might give her 2 black eyes, but the real reason ran deeper. She was thinking about the future. What if she was 80 years old and needed a hip replacement, but also had to replace breast implants? She realized they had a shelf life, so she said no. She removed them, and with that she took back control of her body. But the road To that decision wasn't easy. In 2012 at 48 she joined Dancing with the Stars, and that's when the pressure to look young hit its peak. She admitted it was the height of Botox fillers, spray tans, hair extensions and breast implants. It wasn't really her. Looking back, she said she felt like a cartoon, literally comparing herself to Carrot Top. Botox gave her sharp, pointy eyebrows. She couldn't show emotion. Her face was frozen still. She kept chasing youth. She feared aging out of the roles she wanted to stay the young ingenue, even though she knew it was impossible. Then she saw a photo of herself from an event. It shook her. That moment, along with the quiet support of her husband Timothy Busfield, pushed her to change. He loved her, as she was. No pressure, no expectations. That kind of support gave her space to breathe and to be real. Long before all this, Gilbert had opened up in her 2009 memoir Prairie Tale. It was raw and honest. She wrote about addiction, trauma, and years of hiding behind fame. Alcohol had started out as a social crutch, but it turned into a coping tool. Then came cocaine, her childhood stardom, constant attention, and deep loneliness all collided. She spiraled. The stories were tough to read. Nights she couldn't remember, broken relationships, and pain she tried to numb. But her children gave her the ultimate wake-up call. They asked her to stop drinking. That broke through. She turned to 12-step programs. She went to therapy, and slowly she built herself back up. Her book wasn't just a confession, it became a symbol of survival. She laid it all bare, and in doing so she helped others feel less alone. Later that same year she returned to her roots in a powerful way. She played Maze in Little House on the Prairie, the musical. It opened in Minneapolis in August 2008 and smashed box office records. Tickets sold like never before. Every seat was filled. Then came a 28-city tour across the US and Canada that lasted 34 weeks. Gilbert wasn't just acting, she was also the tour's national spokesperson. But the tour did more than entertain, it gave back. Partnering with Habitat for Humanity, the cast helped build homes in each city they visited. They also worked with the Seeing Eye, a group that trains guide dogs. Gilbert's return to Little House wasn't about nostalgia, it was about rediscovery. The simple values of the show, family, honesty, strength, mirrored the journey she was on. That same sense of resilience showed up on Dancing with the Stars. She may have finished fifth, but her run was unforgettable. Her partner Maxim Churovsky was fiery and intense. They didn't always get along, but the chemistry was real. No one ever knew how far they'd get, and that made every week feel like a cliffhanger. She even danced through injury. A concussion in April 2012 could have taken her out, but she rested just one day and kept going. Her standout moment, a samba with both Chmirovsky brothers. One judge jokingly called it a Chmirovsky sandwich, with Gilbert in the middle as the cream filling on her final night, her 48th birthday. She posted her highest score yet. Still she was eliminated, but instead of disappointment she felt pride. She said, "I'm amazed I made it this far." And she meant it. Then came 2024. It marked 50 years since Little House on the Prairie first aired. The reunion event was huge. Over 18,000 fans showed up. Melissa Gilbert and Dean Butler took the stage together, not as Laura and Al Manso, but as friends who had grown up in the public eye. They shared memories, behind-the-scenes stories, and spoke about how the show shaped them.